Tonight, we journey into the shadows, unraveling stories of terrifying encounters with entities from realms beyond. If you think you're brave enough, join us as we delve into accounts that defy logic and chill the soul. But beware! Each tale serves as a haunting reminder that some doors should remain closed. Title: Shadows in the Frame. Caroline, a high school senior with a full schedule, agrees to babysit for the Porter family despite her reservations. The family had reached out through her mother's friend, and Caroline was reluctant to say no. The house, situated on the edge of a densely wooded area, exudes an air of neglect. While not outwardly menacing, the home's cluttered interiors and odd decor immediately set her on edge. Caroline arrives early evening, meeting Jillian, Max, and Leo. Jillian's precociousness contrasts with her brother's quiet demeanor. Caroline notes the strange masks adorning the walls, which seem to stare down with hollow eyes. Caroline spends the first few hours keeping the kids entertained. She helps Jillian with homework, sets up a board game for the boys, and prepares dinner. The parents leave instructions on the kitchen counter, including emergency numbers and a note about a faulty back door lock that hadn't been repaired yet. Outside, the wind picks up, and Caroline becomes more aware of the house's isolation. While putting the boys to bed, she hears faint creaks from the floorboards but dismisses them as the old house settling. At around 10 p.m., just as Caroline settles on the couch, the lights flicker and go out. The house plunges into darkness, and she fumbles for her phone flashlight. The kids, woken by the sudden outage, call out to her. Caroline reassures them and gathers everyone in the living room. She lights a few candles she finds in a drawer, the flickering flames casting unsettling shadows across the walls and the masks. To distract the kids, Caroline tries storytelling, but Jillian suggests something more engaging. She rummages through Caroline's bag and pulls out a digital camera. "Let's take pictures," Jillian exclaims. At first hesitant, Caroline relents. Jillian begins snapping photos of her brothers making goofy faces. She insists on taking a few of Caroline, who smiles reluctantly, uncomfortable with the idea of being the focus. As Jillian explores angles and lighting with the camera, Caroline notices strange details. The wind outside seems to grow stronger, and the faint rattling of the back door persists. Max points to a shadow moving across the backyard, visible through the glass door. Caroline investigates but sees nothing. She locks the door, making a mental note to tell the Porters about the broken latch. The children eventually tire and fall asleep on the couch. Caroline carries the boys to bed and convinces Jillian to rest. Shortly after midnight, the Porters return. They thank Caroline for her help and ask about the evening. She casually mentions the power outage but decides against bringing up the strange sounds or shadow. Caroline collects her bag and camera, eager to leave. The next morning, Caroline reviews the photos on her camera. The images start innocently enough. Laughing kids, silly poses, and her awkward smile. Then her blood runs cold. In several photos, a shadowy figure is visible in the background, standing just outside the glass door. The man's face is partially obscured, but his posture is deliberate, as if he is watching. Caroline replays the night in her mind. Had the man been there the whole time? Caroline debates what to do. She considers calling the Porters but hesitates, not wanting to alarm them unnecessarily. Instead, she decides to show the photos to a friend, Alex, who is studying photography. Alex examines the photos carefully and confirms they're not a trick of the light. "Whoever this is," Alex says gravely, "was standing there on purpose." Caroline returns to the Porter house under the guise of retrieving a forgotten item. She wants to look around the backyard and see if there are any signs of an intruder. Mrs. Porter is surprised but allows her in. Caroline checks the glass door. The latch is still broken, and muddy footprints are faintly visible near the threshold. She points this out to Mrs. Porter, who grows visibly uncomfortable. Mrs. Porter admits she's felt uneasy in the house since they moved in 6 months ago. She shares stories of hearing footsteps at odd hours and finding objects misplaced. "I always thought it was the kids," she says. Jillian overhears the conversation and confesses, I thought I saw someone outside last night, but I didn't want to scare you. Caroline convinces Mrs. Porter to call the police. They inspect the house and the yard but find no evidence of forced entry. Later that evening, Caroline receives a message from Alex. He enhanced the photos and discovered something chilling. The man in the background had been looking directly at the camera in every shot. Days after her unsettling discovery, Caroline can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. Every time she looks at the photos, the man's dark silhouette feels more sinister. She decides to visit Alex again to discuss the enhanced images in detail. Alex has printed out a few pictures, and they sit together in his small studio. "Look at this," he says, pointing to one photo. "See how his reflection is slightly distorted? That's because of the old glass. But it also tells us he was close, right up against the door." The realization makes Caroline's skin crawl. "Do you think he was trying to get inside?" Alex hesitates before answering. "It's possible. But what's weird is how calm he looks. It's like he knew you were watching but didn't care." Caroline decides to take matters into her own hands. She returns to the Porter house under the pretense of wanting to babysit again. Mrs. Porter, grateful for the help, welcomes her back. Caroline uses the opportunity to subtly ask questions about the house's history. Mrs. Porter admits they've only been there for a short time and don't know much about the previous owners. However, Jillian chimes in during dinner. "Mom, didn't Mr. Taylor say something about the old guy who lived here before us?" Mrs. Porter dismisses Jillian's comment, but Caroline files it away. The Porters leave Caroline alone with the kids again. This time, she's hyper-aware of every sound and shadow. She double-checks the locks on all the doors and windows and even moves a chair in front of the broken latch on the back door. The kids go to bed without incident, but Caroline stays up, her eyes glued to the backyard. The wind rustles the trees, creating eerie shapes in the moonlight. At one point, she swears she sees movement but convinces herself it's just her imagination. Around midnight, there's a knock at the front door. Caroline freezes. The knock comes again, louder this time. She peeks through the peephole and sees a man in a delivery uniform holding a package. "Who is it?" she calls out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Delivery for Mr. Porter," the man replies. Caroline knows the Porters didn't mention expecting a package. "They're not home. Can you come back later?" The man doesn't respond. Instead, he places the package on the porch and walks away. Caroline watches as he disappears into the night. Curiosity gets the better of her, and she retrieves the package. There's no return address, only a blank label with the Porter family's name. She debates whether to open it but ultimately decides against it, leaving it on the kitchen counter. Later, while checking on the kids, she hears a faint creak downstairs. Her heart pounds as she creeps back to the living room, phone in hand, ready to call the police. But there's nothing, just the package sitting exactly where she left it. The Porters return home, and Caroline tells them about the delivery. Mr. Porter opens the package to find an old, dusty book. The title is faded, and the pages are yellowed. "Probably some junk mail," he says, tossing it aside. Caroline doesn't mention her suspicions but makes a mental note to keep track of anything unusual. Determined to learn more about the house, Caroline visits the local library. She combs through public records and old newspapers, eventually uncovering an article about the house's previous owner, a man named Edward Grayson. Grayson was a recluse who rarely left his home. Neighbors described him as odd but harmless, until his sudden disappearance 2 years ago. The police found no evidence of foul play, and the case went cold. Caroline's stomach churns as she reads about Grayson's habit of watching people through his windows. He said it made him feel connected, one neighbor had reported. Caroline returns to Alex with this new information. Together, they theorize that the man in the photos might be connected to Grayson, perhaps a relative or even Grayson himself. "I don't believe in ghosts," Alex says. "But this guy gives me the creeps. If he's been hanging around, someone should have noticed by now." Caroline decides to talk to the neighbors near the Porter house. An elderly woman, Mrs. DeWitt, lives next door to the Porters. When Caroline brings up Grayson, Mrs. DeWitt's demeanor shifts. That man was strange, she says, always staring out his windows, sometimes for hours. After he disappeared, I thought I'd finally feel safe. But, she trails off, glancing at the Porter house. But what? Caroline presses. Mrs. DeWitt hesitates before answering. Sometimes, late at night, I see someone standing in the backyard, always in the same spot. It's like he's waiting for something. Caroline decides to babysit for the Porters one last time, this time fully prepared. She brings a flashlight, pepper spray, and her phone fully charged. The evening passes uneventfully until she hears footsteps outside around 11 p.m. Gripping the flashlight, she peers through the blinds but sees nothing. Then, a soft tapping sound echoes from the back door. She flips on the porch light, illuminating a dark figure standing just beyond the glass.
Caroline Freses.
The man doesn't move, his face obscured by shadow. She snaps a photo with her phone, hoping to catch his features, but when she looks back, he's gone. Terrified, Caroline calls the police. When they arrive, they find no trace of the man but notice the broken latch on the back door. The officer advises the Porters to get it fixed immediately. Before leaving, one officer pulls Caroline aside. This isn't the first report we've had about a prowler in this area. If you see him again, call us right away. That night, Caroline reviews the photo she took. It's blurry but unmistakable. The same man from the earlier photos, now closer than ever. The events of the last babysitting night weigh heavily on Caroline. She finds herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, her nerves on edge. Despite her growing unease, she can't let go of the mystery surrounding the man in the photos. She continues her research, now determined to uncover the truth before anything worse happens. The Porters, shaken by her account and the police's warning, temporarily leave the house to stay with relatives. They ask Caroline to keep them informed of any developments. Caroline's decision to return to the house one final time isn't easy, but she feels she owes it to the family and to herself to find answers. Caroline enlists Alex's help for her return to the Porter home. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and a recorder, they plan to document everything. The house is eerily silent when they arrive. Caroline locks the doors and double-checks the windows, her mind racing with memories of the man's silhouette. Alex sets up the equipment, positioning a camera to face the backyard and another in the hallway near the children's bedrooms. "I'll check the basement," Alex says, his voice steady but cautious. Caroline nods, staying on the main floor to search for clues. The basement is cluttered with boxes and old furniture, but Alex notices something odd. A faintly worn path in the dusty floor, leading to a corner covered by a large, tattered rug. He pulls the rug aside to reveal a trapdoor. "Caroline!" he calls, his voice echoing up the stairs. Caroline rushes down, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Together, they pry open the trapdoor to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "What is this?" Caroline whispers, her voice barely audible. "Only one way to find out," Alex replies. The staircase leads to a small, windowless room lined with shelves. On the shelves are rows of old cameras and dozens of photo albums. The air is thick with the smell of mildew and dust. Caroline opens one of the albums, her stomach turning as she flips through the pages. Each photo shows people inside the Porter house, some laughing, some completely unaware they're being watched. "These go back decades," Alex says, holding another album. "Whoever took these has been here a long time." Caroline stops on a photo that sends chills down her spine. It's the same man from her pictures, only younger. "This must be Grayson," she says. Among the photos, they find a handwritten note tucked into one of the albums. "They never look up. What does that mean?" Alex wonders aloud. Caroline's eyes dart to the ceiling. "The attic," she says. Back on the main floor, they find the attic hatch. Alex pulls down the ladder, and Caroline reluctantly follows him up. The attic is dark and cramped, filled with old furniture and boxes. Near the far end, they see signs of recent activity. A sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a camera tripod. "He's been living here," Caroline whispers, horrified. Suddenly, a creak from below sends them both into silence. Footsteps echo through the house. "He's here," Alex says, his voice barely above a whisper. They scramble down the attic ladder, trying to remain quiet. Caroline grabs her phone to call the police but fumbles in her panic, dropping it onto the hardwood floor. The sound draws the intruder's attention. From the shadows of the hallway, a figure emerges. The man from the photos. "Run!" Alex shouts, pulling Caroline toward the front door. The man doesn't speak. He moves quickly, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Alex grabs a lamp from a nearby table and hurls it at the man, buying them a few precious seconds to escape. They sprint outside, slamming the door behind them. The man doesn't follow. Instead, he watches them from the window, his expression calm and unnerving. The police arrive minutes later, but by then the man is gone. Officers search the house thoroughly, uncovering the hidden room and the attic setup. They confirm that the man had likely been living in the house for weeks, if not months. Through fingerprints found on the cameras, they identify him as a drifter with a long history of stalking and trespassing. However, his connection to Edward Grayson remains unclear. The Porters decide to sell the house, unable to stay after what happened. Caroline helps them pack, feeling a sense of relief that the ordeal is finally over. Before leaving, she takes one last look at the backyard. The wind rustles the trees, but this time, she feels no fear. Months later, Caroline sits in her apartment, scrolling through her phone. She comes across the photo of the man from that night. She can't bring herself to delete it, a chilling reminder of how close danger can be. She sets the phone down, her eyes lingering on the faint reflection in her living room window. For a moment, she thinks she sees a shadow move. But when she turns, there's nothing there.